this moment, face into the wind. Northern places we may meet.
I was furiously trying to figure a way out at film, as these snow-capped mountains emerged from the Antarctic Peninsula. And I was there trying to film it. I didn't understand how my camera quite worked yet, and everything was completely overexposed, and I didn't even know what that word was. And I remember Alex Taylor, who's the filmmaker on board, who's, National Film Board, so amazing, huge, filmography of all the award-winning films. And he just flicked the little ND filter on my camera, and it all came into frame. And I was just like, oh my God, there it is.
That's Trevor Wallace. Trevor joined us as a teenager on our 2009 Students on Ice expedition to Antarctica. Since then, he's done a lot. He's an award-winning artist, explorer, filmmaker, and currently the Vice President for Education and Research with the Explorers Club. In 2018, Trevor received the New Explorer of the Year award. I'm really thrilled to have Trevor as our guest today on our new podcast, Greatest Classroom on Earth. 25 years of Students on Ice inspiring youth at the ends of the earth. Hi, I'm Geoff Green, the founder and expedition leader of Students on Ice. In 1999, an idea was born. Imagine if we could bring youth at the beginning of their lives on educational expeditions to the polar regions, two cornerstones of the global ecosystem and windows to the world, and how that inspiring experience might shape their perspectives and even their futures. In December of 2000, we made our maiden ship voyage, bringing a group of youth on a journey to Antarctica. An incredible journey of discovery, connection, and learning in what we would later call the greatest classroom on Earth. It's hard to believe, but Students on Ice is now in its 25th year. Since that first expedition, we've taken more than 4,000 students to the Arctic and the Antarctic, together with teams of educators, elders, artists, researchers, and leaders from over 55 countries. Our mission to connect youth to nature, culture, environmental leadership and stewardship, and even to themselves has remained steady in this changing world. We now have a global network of incredible alumni doing incredible things. This podcast is part of a year-long celebration of Students on Ice. A chance to reflect on the experiences, the connections, and impacts through conversations with the people who were there, getting their stories in their own words. Trevor Wallace, welcome to the SOI podcast.
Thanks so much, Geoff. It's awesome to chat with you.
How are you?
And, I'm doing amazing. It's a beautiful day here in Kaua'i, Hawaii, and it's just so great to reconnect.
Well, most people are just hearing our voices, I suppose, on this podcast, but I can see you. You're looking good. You got a little more gray hair than you did 15 years ago, but you still got lots of hair, more than me.
Man, it's crazy to think it was 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy that it's been 15 years. And we've kept in touch over the years, which is awesome. So this isn't our first time speaking since your expedition 15 years ago, fortunately. Before we get to your Students on Ice story, Trevor, I would love to know more about your early days. Like, where did you grow up and what were you like as a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in Northern California, in Marin County. I was super lucky. My mom moved from the East Coast, bringing me and my brother. She grew up in pretty urban environment, pretty difficult upbringing, and she always just wanted me and my brother to be able to connect to nature. And I was just super blessed to have access to Muir Woods and, the beautiful coastline that we have in Northern California. And, although my mom was a single mom, disabled, and, growing up on Section 8, I didn't really feel that, she was just always looking for new opportunities for me, whether it was volunteering at the Oakland Zoo or, getting involved in outdoor organizations. She really, she was one of the people who was always gunning for me to reach out and have not just experiences in the classroom, but beyond. And my brother as well. He was always doing search and rescue and loved the outdoors. So that was a big part of my childhood. And for me as well, it was just always kind of exploring and going off into the Ring Mountain behind the school that I went to from kindergarten onwards. There was all of these Ohlone archaeological sites and petroglyphs, and it just seemed like there was so much history and richness all around, and
Wow.
that kind of opened my eyes.
You mentioned Section 8. What is that?
So Section 8 is just government subsidized housing, and that was always, my mom was born with a disability. In fact, there was a documentary a while back called Crip Camp, which was about the struggle for disabled people to get more recognition, more accommodations, even just basic things like curb cuts and the ADA compliance of buildings. So doctors were always telling my mom that she'd never be able to walk really, and never be able to have kids, and she was really stubborn and could show that she could raise 2 kids on her own, and really overcame so much. And there was a lot of things in my mom's life that were really challenging, but she created a beautiful childhood for me and my brother, and was always looking for education because she never really finished high school, but both me and my brother were able to attend college, university, my brother being the first, making his way to Harvard Business School. And for me, not so much on the straight and narrow. He's still asking me when I'm going to get a real job. But yeah, my mom she always loved animals and wildlife. She worked for over a decade at the animal shelter, and was always trying to put me in these environments where I felt small, that with all the world's problems, if you can tie back into this beautiful planet, things start to make a little bit more sense.
Is she still around, Trev?
She passed a little over 10 years ago now. And I think back to her a lot. I remember the day I saw the email in high school. I saw a random email about students on ice, and I said, "Mom, I don't know," because I was at boarding school at the time. She'd gotten sick already at that point, and my brother thought it would be good if I had the support of a boarding school. And I was telling my mom, "Oh, Mom, I don't know if I can finish my homework this weekend if I do this application to do this program. There's a scholarship to Antarctica." And she said, "Don't worry, Trevor. I'll talk to your teachers. I'll figure it out. Just do this application. Reach out for this thing." And it was, I was so lucky. She was always supporting me in going out. And it actually ended up being a little bit of a detour in my life after college. I had planned on going to journalism school and a documentary program, but my mom's health took a turn for the worse, so I actually ended up doing this program called Teach for America, where I was trained as a classroom teacher, just so I could be close to my mom. I was right next to the assisted living place that she was in, and she had early onset dementia, so it was time that I got to spend with her. That I really value, those years that I was with her. But it was really challenging, and but I drew a lot on all the strength of my community, and it was kind of being a teacher at that point also really helped ground me, being around young kids and trying to support their dreams while also dealing with this sort of big changing point in my life, and my mom's as well, obviously. Being
a teacher is a good way to it's a great career period. That's kind of how I started as well. And you are still a teacher. But before we get to that, Trev, your mom, what an inspiration, and she must have been and is still incredibly proud of everything you've done and who you are. You talked a little bit there about how you found out about Students on Ice. So you applied. This is back in 2009, I suppose, maybe 2008. And now you got accepted. How did that all happen? And what did you think when you got this email saying you're going to Antarctica?
Man, I mean, it's like a story I always tell, because it's just like, people are like, always, how'd you get into this whole career, and how'd you do this, how do you become a quote unquote explorer and all these things? And, it really, like, I'm not just saying this, Students on Ice legitimately changed my life, and I can source so many things of what I'm doing now back to that moment. There was just a random email that most of my friends thought was spam. They were like, "No, there's no way this is real. Like, this is, a scholarship to go to Antarctica. These things don't even exist." And I thought, no, you might as well try. And I think you actually called me, Geoff. You called me to tell me that I got the scholarship. And I was like, wow, this guy, Geoff Green, giving me a call, and it's really going to happen. My friends still didn't believe me. They were like, yeah, whatever. This is some like, internet scam. Like, please give us your bank info to confirm. And like, before you know, but and that year was a it was and I just kept pinching myself, and they'll say, okay, yeah, Trevor, send us a picture with your, with a penguin. We'll believe you then. And I don't know if we want to include this, but actually my year was delayed a year because I think it was the ship had run aground for that particular year. I think it was some other charter.
Yes.
And then my friends were like, oh yeah, sure, the ship ran aground. Sure. So they were like, it was actually, because it was my senior year in high school, and it was, I got put onto the next winter when it was my first year in college, and they kept being like, yeah, you're going to Antarctica, fat chance. But yeah, lo and behold, a few months later, they got that penguin picture.
With many penguins, I'm sure. Well, for the record, that ship did hit a rock, but it wasn't with Students on Ice, thankfully. It was a trip previous to ours, and it kind of it caused some changes that year, but it all worked out, and away we went. Trevor, I think you got a scholarship to participate. It wasn't an internet scam, but I believe it was one of the Beatrice Snyder scholarships from the Snyder family. Is that right?
It was indeed. And yeah, it's funny to talk about the ship running aground. Flexibility is the key. I'll never forget that one. Flexibility
is the key. I'm glad you remembered that. That's one of the key teachings of Students on Ice, as you know. So the journey of Students on Ice has been an incredible journey. But one day I took Mr. Snyder to Antarctica, and on a different expedition, and I gave a presentation about Students on Ice, and he came up and he said, he basically handed me a check and said, I want this to be for youth from New York City that deserve this opportunity. And since that day, over 24 years ago, he and his family have sponsored way more than 100 students to come on Students on Ice, all from New York. And you were one of the very first. So Mr. Snyder would be extremely proud of you, Trev. I have no doubt about it. He was an incredible, incredible person. What was going through your mind as we prepared for that journey to Antarctica? Because I don't think you'd traveled a whole lot at that point.
I had one experience traveling abroad, which was in part the application essay that I wrote for Students on Ice, which was another scholarship program through the Jane Goodall Foundation, and that was a pretty harrowing experience. It was our group at the end. It was an incredible experience going to wildlife colleges, but I had one experience traveling abroad, and it was life-changing in its own right. Experiencing wildlife in East Africa was incredible, but our group was attacked by bandits at the end of our trip, and I was held at gunpoint and had my ribs broken with a club, and it was just sort of opened my eyes to a whole different part of the world and the realities of global inequality and desperation there. And I think processing that over the years in high school, I was just lucky my mom was willing to let me go on another trip. But it was, I was preparing for the more I learned about Students on Ice, and actually it was, part of that conversation. I remember when you called me in my dorm room in my senior year of high school, talking through that experience and what SOI was going to be like on the ship, and I just couldn't wait. I mean, it was just the thing of dreams, being on a ship, going to this place that seemed so beyond reach, and thinking about all of the expedition team and all the kids from around the world. It was, the first thing I thought of was, man, how can I get my hands on a camera? I'd had this dream of, trying to capture some of this experience, but also a way to bring it back and share it. Because I felt this, I felt this responsibility. I was like, not everyone gets a chance to go down there, and if I can share a little bit of what I learn, this would be amazing. Except I didn't have a camera. I didn't know anyone that could lend me a camera at that point, but because it was delayed a year, I kind of swindled my way into letting the film department at Sarah Lawrence College, and big thanks to Brian Emery there that they let me take one of their cameras, and they weren't scared of me breaking it or dropping it overboard. But I brought this old chunky DVX mini DV tape camera. And I remember I had barely understood. I remember the nights before packing, and I had barely really even used it before, and just being like, oh man, I hope this works out. I hope I don't make a fool of myself.
No, you definitely didn't. And you shared with me just recently the little film you made on that journey, and it stands the test of time. You could already see your creative talents coming through. Some very unique shots of penguins, not the average type of perspective. So you borrowed that camera, and away we went. And we left from Argentina, sailed across the Drake Passage from Tierra del Fuego, which in itself is a journey, isn't it? Getting across the Drake. I can't remember I feel like we might have had a rough Drake Passage crossing. Is that true?
Yeah. Oh, and we loved it. We definitely got a Drake Quake instead of the Drake Lake. It was, I remember one of the other Snyder scholarship kids, it was, I think one of my roommates, Alex, we were like out on the bow, just like holding on, which maybe not the safest, but it was, seeing the wandering albatross just coasting off the wave tops and, snowing sideways. And I was like, this is exactly what I imagined. I love this so much. And it was just, I get a little bit seasick these days. I don't know how I wasn't, curled up in a ball, but I guess maybe the excitement and adrenaline, it was so amazing to see like the power of nature and the Drake. It was, I have dreams about it sometimes. It's so unique.
Well, it's part of the journey, isn't it? It's kind of a rite of passage to get to Antarctica. Crossing the Drake, and you're painting a picture. I don't know if anybody else is ever going to want to come again. We hit rocks. We almost fell off the bow of the ship. Also, for the record, we've never had any injuries on Students on Ice in 25 years. But do you remember that moment, Trevor, when we first saw Antarctica, when we first got there? I remember my first moment very clearly.
Yeah, I think it was funny because I think I was furiously trying to figure a way out how to film, as these snow-capped mountains emerge, from the Antarctic Peninsula. And I was there trying to film it. I didn't understand how my camera quite worked yet, and everything was completely overexposed, and I didn't even know what that word was. And I remember Alex Taylor, he was the a filmmaker on board who's, National Film Board, so amazing, huge, filmography of all the award-winning films. And he just flicked the little ND filter on my camera, and it all came into frame. And I was just like, oh my God, there it is. And, and I got to, also take a moment, not behind the lens, to just take it all in. And it's such a spectacular place, and to be sharing it with we're 100 of your peers and all of the expedition team who are like literal superheroes, polar historians, marine biologists, ornithologists, and guys like Alex and Dr. Fred Roots and Lee Nairway and all these people who made a huge impact on me. It was amazing.
I'm glad you mentioned some of those names, because that expedition that you were on it was a really special journey, and there were some SOI legends on that team, like Dr. Fred Roots and David Fletcher, Scobie Pye, Ule Carlson. You mentioned Lee and Alex. I mean, it was a really, really special journey, and we went to some incredible places that are these days are in some cases, almost impossible to get to, like Heroina Island. And were there any places on the journey that really stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many. I remember Point Wild is just, and Elephant Island is, when you know the Shackleton story, when you imagine people overwintering there, it just puts it all into perspective. And now after, the Endurance being found again and it coming back into the media, this story that, everyone's so consumed with the ship and, finding it, but it's like this human story of people coming together and the levity of it and getting into the how they were able to survive together, and hearing that story from you and some of the other expedition team members who kind of painted the picture of what it meant to, build the James Caird, this sort of ramshackled lifeboat, and that open ocean voyage. It was I think it was Fletch that told me, when when boats were made of wood, people were made of iron, and that always stuck with me. And just, even those little in-between moments of, by the little coffee station, and you say, it's our motor oil. I always think he said, this is our motor oil. And, just the expedition team seemed like they could be, they could be part of Shackleton's team themselves. It's just, legends, like you said, absolute legends.
Well, Fletch was like Shackleton reincarnated, I think. He brought that story to life. Such a great person, and one of the namesakes of our son, actually, Fletcher, who's now 16. It's also a bit of a full circle for you, because as a teenager, going to Elephant Island, Point Wild, learning about the Shackleton journey, the Endurance story, to today, where, of course, the Endurance was just found, and the Explorers Club being a big part of that discovery, and you're now vice president of the Explorers Club. That is so cool. That I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I don't want to jump too ahead of just the experiences there in Antarctica, but it was you that gave me the opportunity to show that little film at Explorers Club headquarters, and as a new freshman in college, and getting invited to take the train down to the Upper East Side, and I had to put together this little film, and you walk in these doors of so much history and so much legacy of polar exploration, but all around the world in expeditions, and you can just feel the energy of it. And I thought, oh man, this makes so much sense that, Geoff would be a member, and Dr. Fred Roots is a member here and a medalist, and it was just, you gave me a chance to show something in those hallowed halls, and I thought, oh man, I would love to make this a part of my life in some way. These group of people who call themselves explorers, and I didn't really understand even what that meant at that point, but I knew I wanted to be part of it. And you opened that door for me. Really, Students on Ice opened that door for me to imagine myself, as part of this organization, which is very tied in with SOI, and then beyond that, Adventure Canada and all the other spin-offs that all really had its original origin in my SOI experience.
Trevor, do you know what that means now? What does that mean to be an explorer today?
I think when I first saw it as a teenager, you see the flag, you hear about the famous first to the top of Mount Everest, first into the bottom of Marianas Trench, and of course getting to meet people like Captain Don Walsh, who's a great SOI legend as well, getting to interview him. It feels like it's these momentous feats, but when you meet the people like Don Walsh, for example, what he represented and what so many members represent is not conquering, not staking a claim. That flag, what it represents is curiosity. It's about a shared will to go out and try to understand, and more so in the 21st century, to protect what's out there, what's left, what needs protecting. Not just going out to these far-flung places, but explorers being, exploring in their backyard, indigenous communities being explorers themselves, tracing back their their oral histories, their knowledge of crossing the Bering Strait up into the north, and people who have a deep knowledge, whether that's, measured in university degrees or not. It's an understanding of trying to know our planet better, and sharing the story, that it's about the knowledge, not necessarily the accolades or exploration for centuries being part of the colonial apparatus to carve up and map and divvy up the world. But now it's international collaboration, which is so tied in, same with the ethos of Students on Ice, that flag is not one nation's flag, but humanity trying to work together and coming together with a common goal.
Well put, my friend. And there's so much to learn, isn't there? Like, fundamentally, how are we going to live on planet Earth sustainably for the future? And that's where I think the spirit of exploration is needed now more than ever before. And it's great to know that you are carrying that, helping to carry that torch. And Students on Ice has always sort of been about trying to help pass that torch on. And you've done so much, Trevor, in your short life so far, and your work's been featured by National Geographic, the Smithsonian, Discovery. You're working on all kinds of expedition films around the world, from Siberia to the Amazon, and I know you're just back from Spain, where you're doing an archaeological dig there, or not a dig, a diving expedition. So tell us what's next, what's going on, and then I want to come back to, we'll just go in weird circles here, but what's driving your passion right now?
Like you said, I just came back actually from 3 or 4 expeditions, one after the other. I'm trying to catch up with you, Geoff, with the pace and the volume of projects and dreams to fulfill. You just really inspired me as an expedition leader in putting together a team. So for years I've been working in that documentary role, where I have shot expedition films, and I'm still doing that to a large extent. I was in the Darien Gap with a nonprofit called the Leatherback Project, shooting a short documentary about leatherback conservation there, and a really incredible team of women working together, Indigenous women from the Gunayala community and marine biologists from around the world. Actually, a Navy captain named Genoveva Forero, who's amazing. She's keeping us safe in one of the most dangerous parts of the world. So we're able to shoot this beautiful piece, which I think shows that conservation and trying to protect these endangered species, it's not always just that one conservation hero. We need to work as a collective. And in honor of my mom, I wanted to tell a story of women on the forefront of conservation. And this project, Sisters of the Sea, is gaining some momentum, and I went directly from there to the Arctic, and worked a couple trips with Adventure Canada, another big tie-in with Students on Ice. We could talk about more. And then after that, I was in Siberia, and then straight from Siberia to Menorca, where in this case I stepped into the role of an expedition leader. And I remember it was like 2 years ago when I first was cooking up this idea. I called you and I thought, man, I need to talk to Geoff, because it became clear at this point there was a lot of things in play where we had an archaeological team put together. We had, some specialists in different areas, and it seemed like there needed to be a leader to step up, somebody to get resources and to organize and to delegate and logistics. And I didn't know if I thought of myself as that. I thought of myself as, more of a creative and, supporting role, whether it's in the archaeology, but then it just seemed like the project wouldn't happen if somebody didn't step in. And I had this idea to give an education element to this underwater archaeology project, because we found essentially what's an underwater museum in just 12 feet of water. It's this little cove on the western side of Minorca that spans back to Roman times. It used to be the settlement of Iamo, and the old harbor of Ciutadella has never been dredged. Most of the harbors in the Mediterranean have been dredged in the last century, but here you have just, array of shipwrecks that were just sitting there. And I connected with the local archaeologist, Xavier, who's been working there for over 20 years. And he said, yeah, we would love to bring folks from the Explorers Club. And, but archaeology is a destructive process. As you're excavating it, you're destroying it as you go. So we can't just bring anybody. And I thought, well, I know a lot of people would be interested in going. I have this background in education. Let's train folks in this relatively safe environment in shallow water, beautiful Mediterranean, definitely not Siberia in terms of food and accommodation. And yeah, we've been able to train over 20 people with our underwater archaeology field school. We designed a PADI specialty course, exploration diver underwater archaeology. And we've had 2 scholarship students so far that have been really fulfilling for me. A 16-year-old Aiden Babao. Eugen was his dad who came with him, came last year. And then Fox Langer, who is a 19-year-old archaeology student this year that we brought in with a scholarship. So it was a lot of things started to come full circle. And for me personally, I think, a lot of my projects are either on the archaeological side, looking back deep into time and trying to understand our human story so we don't make the same mistakes. And then also, how do we protect, and I don't see them as so wildly different. And that's the amazing thing about the Explorers Club, or, the folks you have as students on ice, is that you can have these variety of interests and you can find a way to tie them together, because I'm super passionate about the environment and rights of nature and all of these, very pressing issues that need stories to be told and new research that needs to be done. But also like the slow process of unraveling our human story, I think can give us such a better context of where we're at now. So I'm playing in these different worlds, and I'm just lucky to have the network of mentors. I think that was what Students on Ice provided for me too. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Like, James Raffin. I was just in Kugluktuk last February with good old JR. Roped me into a ragtag team supported by Arts Can Circle to bring instruments and do a songwriting workshop. Yeah, it felt very SOI, tie-in, and I always wear my SOI hat. I always bring this.
Yeah, well, if you ever need a new one, let me know. But I just had dinner with James a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about you. Well, I mean, that's all incredible, Trevor. I mean, there you go. Those early days as a teacher have paid off in many ways to where you are today, and you channeled your inner Shackleton along the way. You're becoming an incredible leader in so many respects. I'm so proud of you. And you and I have talked about collaborating now, haven't we? And how maybe for the alumni of Students on Ice listening to this interview, one idea we had was how we can get alumni engaged in some of your projects. So stay tuned, let's say, on that, and maybe we can really close that circle, as it were. And speaking of that, and you can touch on that if you want, Trevor, but did you keep in touch with some of the other youth on your journey in 2009?
Yeah, it's funny, these circuitous paths, how they come back and forth. And for example, there was a friend, Dakota Arutse, who was part of our cohort, and meeting mutual friends. I mean, especially now working up in the Arctic, it's kind of a small community up there, and anytime I wear my SOI hat when I'm working on board with Adventure Canada, it's like I meet kids who are more recent SOI youth participants, and I keep up on Facebook, and it's just awesome to see, what everybody's doing at the youth summits and out at COP. And it's like, we really feel like this movement now. And sometimes it's humbling. It's humbling to see what all the students are doing. And I was so lucky to be on board with Adventure Canada when the group came with Linda Brown and Shirley Mann at the Talariutup Imanga Greenland voyage, where he had 8 youth. And I was able to kind of tie into that group. And, I got to share all my experiences about SOI and how it benefited me and how to, use that network and community onwards. And I learned so much from the youth themselves. I think, I'm thinking of one of the participants, Draco Dumphy, who's a young guy from Newfoundland, Mi'kmaq, and he's just rekindling language, traditions, and, bring that critical eye and always asking really good questions. And, my role is I was doing little interviews, and it's just, it's amazing how you continue after 25 years to find these like bright lights of young people who, just challenge you and, kind of shake things up and give you a new perspective. And, Linda has been a great mentor to me over the years too. I think that was another, I connected with her on an Adventure Canada trip back in 2016. I was shooting a film about Inuit Kayuma Yatukanit, this Inuit traditional knowledge, and she was one of the folks I interviewed. And, over the years, just staying in touch, and just how, even though I was on the Antarctic Expedition, how so much of my work has brought me up north, and being able to see the ripple effects of what SOI means up north. You meet these people, and for example, I was in Saluit this past season, and I was wearing my hat, and this young guy who was running a youth initiative there came up to me and said, "Oh, are you SOI?" And he's from Kuujjuaq, Tugai, and just like such an amazing, well-spoken kid. And we took selfies together and traded SOI stories. And there's just this warmth.
Yeah, it's a family, isn't it? It's a global family, and you're a big part of it. And you're a huge ambassador, to be honest, Trev, for Students on Ice. So thank you for that. Yeah, I could talk to you all day, and maybe we will. Maybe let's just keep going here. You mentioned Linda Brown. For those of you listening, you may know Linda as our director of the alumni program for Students on Ice, and she's planning all kinds of exciting things with her team for the upcoming year, including this podcast. We also have an alumni summit coming up next October, which we hope is going to bring many of our global family together in person, which I can't wait for. So stay tuned for that. And we're also looking at putting a book together, and we need everybody's contributions and help to make that happen. Trev, is there, going back to your journey all those years ago to Antarctica, which has kind of really, been a catalyst for so many incredible things for you, which I'm just thrilled about. Is there a moment, is there a person, is there a connection that really stands out? You mentioned you think about the journey a lot, and that's one thing I hear a lot from alumni is there aren't many days go by where they don't think about that expedition, which I find is just incredible. But what was that for you?
I mean, I come back sort of again and again, there's so many individual interactions, but there was any moment I had with Fred, I'll never forget. Dr. Roots, rather. But, I mean, he always was just known as Fred. He is just, this larger-than-life person, but such a quiet, humble presence, and such this, wisdom that just emanates, but also just, so down to earth. I remember at one point, it was actually towards the end of the trip, and I think we were in Ushuaia, and it was after we had this awesome party. Geoff was busting out the splits, and we were all just in the basking in the wake of this amazing experience. And there was this little quiet moment where Dr. Roots was just looking at this group of gulls. Gary Donaldson. I did not say seagulls. But he was just watching these gulls just in this little bay, and it was amazing just to see him, somebody who's been part of, research that's helped us understand the climate and the planet, like these big shifts, but just still an appreciation for these creatures that, and also Fred recited that poem, that Rudyard Kipling poem, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the room, the If poem, and I think there's so many lines in that poem that, of course it's Kipling's words, but I feel like Fred just embodied it so much. And there's one that said, meeting triumph and disaster, two imposters just the same. And I come back to that, time and time again, when things seem like everything's going right, just sort of check yourself. And, when everything seems to be going wrong and things are falling apart, it's, it's this anchor point. And, Fred I just really value the time. Yeah, he was just like, not one to toot his own horn and doing that dog sled run across where he done one of the, if not the longest dog sled run.
Yeah, longest in human history.
And I believe his belt was of his, was actually part of the harness of his lead dog.
Yeah, Rachel.
So, yeah, it's just someone who's...
I'm so glad you brought up Fred. He's just a huge part of why Students on Ice exists. In fact, he was one of the first people I went to talk to about the idea, along with Mary Simon, who's now our Governor General here in Canada, first Indigenous Governor General, and someone I'm hoping to interview as part of this podcast, so stay tuned. Unfortunately, we can't interview Fred because we lost him a few years ago, but yeah, he lives on. I still read that poem as well as some other poems that he used to regularly recite off the top of his head. He was an incredible person, a human being. I don't know if you remember the story where he said he gave a talk once at Princeton about plate tectonics, and sitting in the front row was Albert Einstein listening to Fred. And then usually when he'd tell that story, the students on Students on Ice would sit up and say, oh, well, geez, maybe I should listen to what Fred has to say as well. But what a guy. Incredible. And you'll be happy to know, Trev, I still bust out the splits from time to time. They're not quite as good as they used to be.
There we go. I want to see it next time. They'll have to cut in a clip of the real deal. You have to see it to believe it.
Come to the alumni summit. I'll start stretching now.
There we go. There was one little Fred quote that I think I caught in that little film, and it just always reminded me, where he says, don't let your minds be boggled. When you're thinking about these big problems, or, how big the world or the universe is, and how complex, and I think it's such a great reminder, and more important now, when we're just kind of bombarded by information. There's so much noise. I think we can have a different type of mind-boggling that goes on, but that grounding, to not be overwhelmed. And I think that ties into that theme of optimism, which is so important. And what Students on Ice embodies is, not being overwhelmed, and, understanding that we're part of something so much bigger. And, we're coming from so many different backgrounds, so many different cultures and languages, but that, there's a sense of community that, unites us together, and that these problems don't overwhelm us. And all the amazing ways that conversations are facilitated and differences are mitigated. And I'm looking forward to every time I get a chance to just dip my toe into Students on Ice in that world. It's like, it really does feel like there's hope.
I think so too. I definitely agree with you there, Trevor. And one other thing Fred always taught us was he always took a global perspective, didn't he? Whether that was geological history or human history, he had an incredible mind that we're so thankful for. Yeah, before I get too emotional there about Fred, we'll just leave it there. Well, as you know, he got the Explorers Medal at the Explorers Club years ago, and I had the great honor to introduce him on the stage at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. And he got a standing ovation. He was in his 90s, and he got a standing ovation at the end of his speech. And to get 2 standing O's in New York City is not an easy thing to do. But he did it because he was the real deal, wasn't he? And one of the things about Students on Ice is there's no BS, is there? It's all genuine. Everybody, especially after you spent 2 days seasick, all that superficiality gets washed away. And I think that's been part of the magic of Students on Ice, is it's just bringing great people together in nature, letting Mother Nature really do most of the work, and then letting the magic happen. And I'm so glad that you've been a part of that magic, Trev. We should probably wrap it up here today. Is any last words that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I have a big debt of gratitude, and I feel so lucky to have had all these experiences. And really, it is those little turning points in your life where you put yourself out there. Maybe it's a random email that you see, but just don't be afraid of failing, and don't be afraid of reaching out to try to make those dreams happen, because it'll open doors to people that may have done incredible things, and it seems like, oh, how could I fit into a room full of all of these people who've done so much? But you'd be surprised in communities that make that a possibility, of mentorship and people who believe in you. And yeah, just thanks so much to you, Geoff, for believing in me. And I'm looking forward to, the field schools that I plan on putting together, expeditions and leading and documentaries, and how we can all, bring it full circle again, because paying it forward is what it's all about. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
I can't wait to see what comes next with you, my friend. And yeah, I mean, it's all about teamwork, isn't it? And it's about partnerships and people. You can't go wrong if you surround yourself with great people. We've often said at the end of a Students on Ice journey, when nobody wants to go home, that it's not at the end, it's just the beginning of the big journey ahead. And you are on an incredible journey, Trevor, with many more twists and turns and successes. Can't wait to keep in touch. Let's see how we can collaborate, and I hope to see you soon. Trevor, thanks so much for coming on this podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Geoff.
I want to thank the wonderful Sarah Harmer for our theme song, Lancaster Sound. And if everyone listening here enjoyed the podcast, please give us a review and rating wherever you listen, and share a link of this episode with family and friends, because that's the best way to make sure that this conversation and others reach a really wide audience. To learn more about Students on Ice, go to studentsonice.com or soifoundation.org, and give us a follow on social media. There you go. My podcast hosting duties are complete now. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Until next time, I'm Geoff Green. Thanks again, Trevor.
Feel this moment, face into